Amara Bello had exactly $40 in her purse, and a decision she couldn't take back. The rain hit Peachtree Street in sheets, hammering the awning above the shelter where she volunteered 3 nights a week. She should have already been home. Instead, she stood frozen at the corner, staring at the man curled against the brick wall of the pharmacy. His coat was soaked through. His hands shook too hard to hold the paper cup in front of him. People stepped around him like he was a crack in the sidewalk. Something about the way he held his head still proud, even folded into himself, made her chest tighten. "Sir," she said, crouching down.
"Are you
"You
hurt
can't
anywhere?"
stay out here tonight. It's supposed to drop
I'm
below
fine.
freezing." He looked up. For one strange second, his eyes didn't look like a man who'd given up. They looked like a man watching her very carefully. "I'm fine," he said. Low, controlled. Not the voice she expected. "You're not fine. You're turning blue." She didn't know why the next words came out. She would ask herself that for weeks. "Come home with me.
"Are you hurt
Just
anywhere?"
for tonight. Just until the storm passes."
I'm fine.
He hesitated. Something crossed his face, not gratitude. Calculation. Gone so fast she told herself she'd imagined it. "You don't know me," he said quietly. "I know you're a person freezing on a sidewalk in a city that stopped looking at you," Amara said. "That's enough for tonight." She would replay that sentence 100 times before this was over. 'Cause she was wrong. It was not enough. It was nowhere close to enough. If this is the kind of story that makes you lean in a little closer, hit subscribe before we go any further. Drop a like and tell me where in the world you're watching from tonight. Now back to Amara and the stranger she just invited into her home. His name, he told her, was Julian. Just Julian. No last name offered, and something in his tone told her not to ask twice. He sat stiffly at her kitchen table, wrapped in the one clean blanket she owned, sipping coffee like it was the first warm thing he'd tasted in months. Amara's apartment was small, 1-bedroom, second-hand furniture, a framed photo of her late mother on the wall in Lagos traditional dress. She was 31, a home health aide who spent her days changing bandages and her nights stretching one paycheck across a month that never seemed to end. She had nothing to spare. She'd given it anyway. "Why did you do that?" Julian asked, watching her over the rim of the mug. "People don't stop for men like me anymore. My mother used to say you can tell everything about a person by how they treat someone who can't do anything for them in return," Amara said, folding a second blanket for the couch. "I don't know your story. I don't need to. Tonight you're not out there. That's all that matters." He went quiet for a long moment. "You should be more careful who you bring into your home." "Is that a threat?" "No." His jaw tightened. "It's a warning. For your sake, not mine." The words sat strangely in the room, heavier than they should have been for a man with nothing but the clothes on his back. Amara told herself it was exhaustion talking, trauma talking, a man who'd been through more than she could imagine. She didn't yet know how right she was and how wrong about the reason. She woke near 3 a.m. to the low murmur of his voice from the living room. She froze in the hallway, listening. He was on her landline, the one she kept for emergencies. The one she never imagined a homeless man would know how to use like it was second nature. "No, nothing's changed. I need 48 hours, Julian was saying, voice sharp, entirely unlike the broken whisper from the sidewalk. "Tell the board I'm still assessing. And tell Min June if he moves before I say the word, I will know." Amara's blood went cold. Board. Assessing. This was not the voice of a man who'd been begging for spare change 3 hours earlier. She stepped back into the shadow of the hallway, heart hammering, and watched him hang up the phone and sit motionless in her living room, a stranger she had let into her home, wearing homelessness like a coat he could take off whenever he chose. In the morning, she decided she would ask him who he really was. She had no idea the answer would put her life in more danger than the freezing rain ever could have. If this story is already pulling something out of you, the kind of feeling you can't quite name yet, go ahead and drop a comment below. I want to hear what you're feeling right now because it's about to get a lot heavier. Morning light cut through the blinds in thin gray lines, and Amara stood in her kitchen doorway watching Julian fold the blanket with a precision that didn't match a man who'd slept on concrete for however long he claimed. Corners squared. Edges even. She'd seen soldiers fold blankets like that. She'd seen no one else. "You slept well?" she asked, keeping her voice light, testing the water. "Well enough." He didn't look up. "Who's Min-jun?" His hands stopped moving. For just a second, barely long enough to notice, except she'd been watching for it. Something flickered behind his eyes. Then it was gone, replaced by the same tired, guarded stranger from the sidewalk. "You were listening," he said. "Not a question." "You were loud." Amara crossed her arms. A man begging on the street doesn't call someone at 3 in the morning talking about boards and assessments. "Who are you?" Julian set the blanket down slowly, and for the first time since she'd found him, he looked directly at her. Really looked. The way people look at something they're deciding whether to trust. "If I tell you," he said, "you can't unknow it. And once you know it, you become part of something you didn't ask for. I've already put you at more risk than you understand just by being here. Try me." He exhaled, long and slow, like a man setting down a weight he'd been carrying so long his shoulders had forgotten what it felt like to be light. "My name isn't Julian. It's Julian Osekong. I run Halcyon Dynamics." He watched her face for recognition and found none, which seemed to surprise him more than anything else that morning. "You don't know the name." "Should I?" "Forbes ranked me the wealthiest man alive for the last 3 years." He said it flatly, no pride in it, like reciting a diagnosis. $91 billion. 14 companies. And 48 hours ago, someone inside my own company tried to have me killed. The mug slipped from Amara's fingers and shattered against the tile, coffee splashing dark across her bare feet. She barely felt it. "That's not," she shook her head like she could physically dislodge the sentence. "That's not possible. You were freezing. You were begging on a street corner. Rich men don't. Rich men don't disappear," Julian said quietly. "That's exactly why I did it. If Min-jun Choi believes I'm dead or lost, or broken somewhere he can't find me, he moves carelessly. If he knows I'm alive and hunting, he moves carefully. I needed him careless." He looked down at his hands that, she now noticed, despite the grime, were too well kept, nails too clean, for a man who'd truly been living rough. "I've been on the street 11 days. Long enough to become invisible. Long enough that when the car that was following me lost my trail, it lost it completely. Someone was following you." Amara's voice had gone very small. "Someone has been following me since the night my own head of security tried to put a bullet in the back of my skull in a parking garage in Seoul." Julian's jaw tightened, and for the first time, she saw the fear underneath the control, the fear of a man who had learned, violently and recently, that he could not trust the people closest to him. "I got out. Barely. I've been moving through this city for a week and a half with nothing, trusting no one, sleeping where no one would think to look for a billionaire. And then a woman with kind eyes and an empty coffee tin decided to bring me into her home." Amara sat down hard in the kitchen chair, her legs no longer trustworthy. "Why are you telling me this? You could have just left this morning." "I would never have known. Because last night while you slept, someone drove past this building twice." Julian's voice dropped, quiet and grave. "Same car. Same plate partially obscured. I don't think they've found me yet. But I think they're close. And I needed you to understand what you're standing next to before you decide whether to throw me back out into that street, because if you do, I need to know now, while there's still time to disappear again before he finds this address." Amara's mind raced through 11 days of headlines she hadn't been reading, gala photos she'd scrolled past without a second glance, a name Osekong that suddenly rearranged itself into a face she now realized she actually had seen once, on a magazine cover at a hospital gift shop, looking nothing like the broken man in her kitchen and everything like him at the same time. "If I asked you to leave," she said slowly, "would you actually go?" "Yes." No hesitation. "Tonight. I wouldn't put this on you another hour if you asked me not to." She thought of her mother's voice again, the woman who taught her that mercy shown for the wrong reasons was still mercy, but mercy shown without knowing the cost was something closer to faith. She hadn't asked for any of this. She hadn't asked to become the only person standing between the richest man alive and whoever wanted him gone. "Stay," Amara heard herself say. "But you're going to tell me everything. All of it. Starting with who Min-jun Choi is, and why he wants you dead." Julian's eyes softened with something that looked dangerously close to relief and something else beneath it, something he didn't have a name for yet either. "Then you should sit down," he said. "Because it doesn't start with Min-jun. It starts with my father, and a company that was never supposed to be mine." Outside, 3 blocks away, a black sedan idled at the curb of a street Amara had walked 1,000 times, its engine running, its driver watching her building with a patience that had nothing to do with waiting for a fare. If you felt that shift just now, go ahead and comment where this story is taking you emotionally. And like the video if it's got you sitting forward already. It's about to get a lot more personal. Julian didn't sit right away. He walked to the window instead, angling himself so he could see the street without being seen from it, a habit, Amara realized, that had probably kept him alive the last 11 days. "My father built Halcyon out of a shipping container in Busan," he said, his back still to her. "Literally. 1 container, 1 contract, and a stubbornness that made him impossible to work for and impossible not to respect. By the time I was 20 it was steel, then logistics, then energy. By the time I was 30 it was the largest privately held conglomerate in East Asia. And I was the only son of a man who trusted exactly 2 people in this world, himself, and eventually me. And Min-jun. Min-jun Choi was the 3rd person my father ever trusted." Julian's voice hardened. "He came in as legal counsel when I was 22. Brilliant. Loyal, or so it looked. My father used to say Min-jun had the mind of a chess player and the face of a man who'd never lost a hand of cards in his life. He meant it as a compliment." Bitter breath. "I understand it differently now." Amara pulled her knees up onto the chair, wrapping her arms around them, watching this stranger unravel in her kitchen like a man confessing to a priest. "What happened to your father?" Silence stretched long enough that she almost regretted asking. When Julian finally spoke, something in his voice had gone hollow. "He died 18 months ago. Heart failure, the doctors said. Sudden but not shocking. He was 73. He worked like he was 35, and he'd been warned a dozen times." Julian turned from the window, and for the first time she saw something that looked less like a billionaire and more like a son. "I believed that for a year. I grieved him, I buried him, I took over a company built on his back and tried to be worthy of it. And then 4 months ago, an internal auditor I trust brought me a discrepancy in the medical procurement records at our Seoul headquarters. Almost invisible. A compound that shouldn't have been ordered, shouldn't have been delivered, and was signed for by someone with clearance to be in my father's private office 3 days before he died." Amara's stomach turned over. "You think he was murdered?" "I know he was murdered." Julian's hands curled into fists at his sides. "And I know Min-jun Choi signed the delivery authorization because I have the document. What I don't know, what I still don't fully understand, is why. Min-jun had everything already. Power, wealth, my father's trust, a board seat, a legacy he helped build. Killing my father gained him nothing unless..." He stopped himself. "Unless what?" Amara pressed. "Unless the plan was never to stop with my father." Julian's jaw tightened. "The night I confronted him with what I'd found quietly, carefully, I thought no one else knew I was ambushed in the parking structure beneath our own building. A man I didn't recognize. Professional. If my driver hadn't come back for a forgotten folder at exactly the wrong moment for the shooter and exactly the right moment for me, you would have found my name in an obituary instead of freezing on a street corner." He exhaled shakily. "I disappeared that night. No warning, no goodbye to anyone, because I couldn't be sure who else was involved. I couldn't trust security. I couldn't trust the board. I couldn't trust the police because I didn't know how deep this went. So I became no one. A man with no name, no company, no fortune, because the moment Julian Osekong resurfaced, I became a target again." Amara sat with that for a long moment, the shattered mug still lying forgotten on her kitchen floor, coffee drying into a dark stain between them. "So what changes now?" Why tell me all this instead of just disappearing again tonight like you said you would? Julian looked at her for a long moment, and something in his expression softened, in a way that seemed to surprise even him. Because you didn't ask me for anything last night. You didn't recognize me, didn't want anything from me, didn't even seem to consider that I might be dangerous to know. In 11 days, you're the first person who's touched my life without an agenda attached to it. His voice dropped lower. And because that car outside isn't going away, and I would rather you understand exactly what you're facing before it finds this door than have you caught in something you never agreed to. As if summoned by the words, Amara's phone buzzed once against the counter, a text from an unknown number. No name, no context. We know he's with you. Send him out and nothing happens to you. Protect him, and we can't promise the same. The color drained from her face as she turned the screen toward Julian. His whole body went rigid, the calculating stillness she'd noticed the very first night sliding back over him like armor. They already found the address, he said quietly. That means someone talked. That means it wasn't a stranger's car that lost my trail 11 days ago. It means someone let me disappear on purpose, to see where I'd surface, and who I'd trust enough to bring inside. His eyes lifted to hers, dark with a dread that had nothing to do with himself anymore. Amara, I need you to listen to me very carefully. In the next 10 minutes, we are either going to run, or we are going to find out exactly how much danger you just chose to stand in. Outside, the black sedan's engine cut off. 2 doors opened at once. If your heart just skipped reading that comment, I felt that. And hit like right now, because what happens next is going to change everything you think you know about who's really hunting Julian. Let's keep going. The knock never came. That was the first wrong thing. Julian moved before Amara could process what was happening, grabbing her wrist and pulling her away from the window, pressing her back against the kitchen wall with a hand raised for silence. Footsteps. 2 sets. Moving with the unhurried confidence of men who weren't worried about being seen. Not police. Police announced themselves. These men were checking exits. Bedroom now, Julian breathed. Is there a fire escape? Through the window, yes, but Julian. Go. I'll draw them toward the front. No. Amara's voice came out steadier than she felt, some old stubbornness rising up through the fear. You said it yourself, I'm already part of this. I'm not leaving you to face 2 armed men alone in my own apartment. Something crossed his face, frustration and something gentler tangled together, but there was no time to argue. A shadow passed the frosted glass of the front door, testing the handle with slow, deliberate pressure. Now. Julian's eyes swept the kitchen and landed on her block of knives, then just as quickly dismissed it. That won't help against what's coming. We need to be gone before that door opens. He pulled her toward the bedroom, and together they eased the window up, the old frame groaning louder than either of them wanted. Amara's building didn't have a proper fire escape, just a rusted ladder bolted to brick, leading down into the alley behind the dumpsters. Julian went first, testing each rung, then reached up for her. They were 3 rungs down when the front door splintered inward. Faster, Julian hissed, and Amara didn't need telling twice. Her bare feet, she hadn't even thought to grab shoes, hit cold metal, then wet asphalt, and Julian's hand closed around hers as they broke into a run down the alley, the shouts of 2 men echoing off brick behind them. They didn't stop running until 3 blocks later, gasping in the mouth of a parking garage, hearts slamming. Julian pulled her behind a concrete pillar, both of them pressed into shadow, listening. No footsteps, no shouts, just the distant hum of morning traffic starting to wake the city up, oblivious to what had just happened 4 floors above their heads. They'll check hospitals, bus stations, anywhere with cameras, Julian said quietly, still catching his breath. We need cash, a car that isn't traceable to either of us, and somewhere to think. I have. He stopped, and something almost like a bitter laugh escaped him. I have $91 billion and I can't access a single cent of it without triggering a location ping that will have them here in 20 minutes. I have $40 and a 2011 Honda with a check engine light that's been on since March, Amara said. It's parked 2 blocks from here. Julian looked at her, really looked. The way he had that morning in her kitchen, and for the first time since she'd found him on that sidewalk, something like a real, unguarded smile touched the corner of his mouth. 11 days ago I would have laughed at the idea of my life depending on a car with a check engine light. Right now, it might be the only thing that saves it. They reached her Honda without incident, Amara's hand shaking too badly to get the key in the ignition on the first try. Julian reached over and steadied her fingers with his own a small gesture, but it grounded her enough to turn the engine over. "Where do we go?" she asked as they pulled out into traffic, forcing herself to drive at a normal speed, to look like any other Tuesday morning in Atlanta. "There's someone I might still be able to trust," Julian said slowly, like the words cost him something. "My father's oldest friend. A man named Elder Boateng, retired now, lives outside the city. He was there the day Halcyon was founded. If anyone in my father's world is untouched by Min Jun's reach, it's him." He hesitated. "But reaching him means using a number I haven't dared call in 11 days. The moment I do, if that line isn't as clean as I think it is, we hand them exactly what they need to find us. Do we have another option?" Julian's silence was answer enough. They drove for 20 minutes in a tense, watchful quiet before Julian finally pulled a folded scrap of paper from the inside of his soaked coat, a number, memorized so many times the ink had nearly worn away, and asked Amara to pull into a gas station with a payphone bolted to the outer wall, one of the last in the city. He fed it coins from Amara's purse, hand steady now in a way that told her he'd made calls like this before, calls that mattered, calls where every second on the line was a second too many. Rang twice. A man's voice answered, low and cautious. "Who is this?" "It's Julian." A pause that stretched like wire pulled taut. "I need you to say nothing that could tell anyone listening who I am. Just tell me, are you safe to talk?" There was a long silence on the other end, long enough that Amara saw real fear flicker across Julian's face for the first time since she'd met him, not fear of the men chasing them, but fear of what silence on that line might mean. Then the voice spoke again, quieter, urgent. "Julian. My God. Everyone believes you're dead. Where are you?" "And who?" the voice caught, sharpened with alarm. "Who told you it was safe to call this number?" Julian's whole body went cold. "No one told me," he said slowly. "I assumed it. Elder, was I wrong to?" The silence that followed was the only answer either of them needed. If that silence just made your stomach drop the way it did mine, writing it, comment below, because trust is about to become the most dangerous currency in this entire story. Hit subscribe if you don't want to miss what Elder Boateng says next. "Julian, listen to me carefully, and don't say another word until I finish." Elder Boateng's voice had dropped to barely above a whisper, the sound of a man glancing over his shoulder even through a phone line. 3 days after you disappeared, Min Jun called an emergency board session. He told everyone you'd suffered a breakdown after your father's death, that you'd become paranoid, unstable, dangerous to the company's stability. He proposed himself as interim CEO. The board voted him in 2 days ago. Amara watched the blood drain from Julian's face, his knuckles white around the receiver. "He's not hunting me to silence me," Julian said slowly, the realization arriving like a blow. "He already won. If I'm dead, or if I'm declared unfit and never resurface, the company is his permanently. So why send men to my—" He stopped. His breath caught. "Unless he's not trying to kill me anymore, Elder. Unless he needs me alive." "A confession," Elder said grimly. "Coerced, staged a video, a signed statement, anything that makes your disappearance look voluntary. Your accusations against him look like the paranoid ravings you're already being painted as. Dead, you're martyr people ask questions about. Alive and discredited, you're a cautionary tale. And he's the steady hand who saved the company from your father's unstable son." Pause, heavy with old grief. "Julian, I loved your father like a brother. I'm telling you this because I do not know who else in that building can be trusted anymore. And because I am an old man who has already buried the person who mattered most to me in that company. I will not bury his son too. Can you help me? I can get you into a room with the 2 board members I still trust completely, and only them tonight," Elder said. "But Julian, the call I just took, On this line, Minjun has had people watching every number connected to your father's inner circle since the week you disappeared. If this line wasn't as clean as I believed, you may have just told them exactly which safe house to burn down next. Julian hung up the phone slowly, and when he turned to Amara, the mask he'd been wearing since the sidewalk controlled, calculating, contained cracked for the first time completely. I just may have gotten you killed, he said, voice raw. For a stranger who slept 11 nights on concrete because he was too proud and too broken to ask a single soul for help. You're not a stranger anymore, Amara said quietly. And I didn't bring you home because I thought it would be easy. You should have left me on that sidewalk. His voice cracked on the words. 11 days of exhaustion and grief and fear finally breaking through the careful control of the world's most powerful man. My father is dead because he trusted the wrong person for 30 years. I have spent 11 days trusting no one, sleeping with one eye open, convinced that was the only way to survive, and then I let myself trust you in one night, because you looked at me like a person instead of a headline. And now I've dragged you into the exact kind of danger I swore I'd never let touch anyone again. Amara reached out and took his hand, the same hand that had steadied hers on the ignition 20 minutes earlier, and held it firmly. My mother died 3 years ago, she said, her voice thick. Cancer. Slow and cruel. And there wasn't a single day in those 18 months I didn't sit beside her bed and wonder what the point of any of it was. The sacrifice, the exhaustion, loving someone that hard when it costs you everything. Her eyes glistened, but her voice didn't waver. And on the last night, she held my hand and told me the point was never about what it cost. It was about who you become in the giving. I have been trying to live like that ever since. Some nights it looks like double shifts at the hospital. Last night it looked like a stranger on a sidewalk. She squeezed his hand. I am not sorry I brought you home, Julian. I would do it again tonight, knowing everything I know now. So stop apologizing for the danger, and start telling me how we survive it together. For a long moment, Julian simply looked at her, something raw and unguarded moving behind his eyes, grief for his father, guilt for the risk he'd brought to her door, and underneath both of those, something warmer and more frightening than either. The dawning unwelcome recognition that in 11 days of losing everything, he had somehow found the one person he trusted more than anyone left alive. Together then, he said quietly. But Amara, if it comes down to a choice between your safety and my company, my fortune, even my name, choose yourself. Every time. Promise me that. She didn't promise. She just held his hand tighter, because they both already knew it wasn't a promise she intended to keep. If this moment hit you the way it hit me, comment below and tell me the last time someone showed up for you when it cost them something real. And if this story is starting to feel like more than just a story, hit that like button right now. We're not done. Not even close. The drive to Elder Boateng's took 40 minutes through back roads Amara had never used, Julian directing her with the quiet precision of a man who'd studied maps of this city long before he ever needed to disappear into it. Twice he had her pull into random parking lots and wait, watching the traffic behind them, before nodding for her to continue. Neither time did she see anything. Both times, his shoulders stayed rigid until they moved again. You've done this before, she said finally, unable to hold the question in any longer. Evasive driving. Watching for tails. That's not something billionaires learn at Harvard. My father insisted on it, Julian said, eyes still on the side mirror. After a kidnapping attempt on a rival's son when I was 19. He said a man who builds an empire makes enemies whether he wants them or not, and only fools wait until the knife is at their throat to learn how to survive one. A humorless breath. I used to think he was being paranoid. I would give anything to apologize to him for thinking that. Elder Boateng's house sat at the end of a long gravel drive outside the city, unassuming, modest for a man who'd once sat on the board of one of the largest companies in Asia. He met them at the door himself, 70-something, silver-haired, moving with the careful alertness of a man who had spent the morning checking his own windows more than once. You look like your father did the week before he died, Elder said quietly, pulling Julian into a brief, fierce embrace before turning to Amara with a small, grateful bow of his head. And you must be the reason he's still breathing. Come in. Quickly. Inside, 2 other figures waited, a woman in her 60s with sharp, assessing eyes, introduced as Director Song Hyojin, and a younger man Amara didn't recognize at all, tense and pale, who Elder introduced simply as, "Someone who came to me an hour ago with something you need to see, Julian, before we go any further." The younger man's hands trembled as he set a laptop on the table. "My name is Dae-ho. I worked in Min-jun's office. I filed procurement records, the same records the auditor found." He swallowed hard. "2 days ago, Min-jun asked me to destroy the digital trail connecting that medical compound to your father's office. I copied it before I did." He turned the screen toward Julian. "I think I know why he needed your father gone 18 months before he made his move for the CEO seat. It wasn't about power. Or it wasn't only about power." Julian leaned over the screen, and Amara watched his face change from grief to confusion to something colder and more dangerous than either. "This is a shareholder registry," he said slowly. "From 19 years ago." His eyes lifted to Elder's. "Why does Min-jun's name appear on an ownership document from before he ever worked for my father?" The room went very still. Elder's expression had gone gray. "Because Min-jun Choi is not who he told your father he was," Dae-ho said, voice shaking. "Before he was your father's counsel, he ran a shell company that tried to buy out Halcyon's original shipping contracts and force your father into bankruptcy in its first year. Your father won. Crushed him, actually took the contracts, the clients, nearly the man's reputation along with them. 2 years later, Min-jun applied for a legal position under a different transliteration of his name. Your father never made the connection. I don't think anyone did until I found this." Julian sat down heavily, the pieces reassembling into a shape darker than anything he'd imagined in 11 days on the street. "He didn't earn his way into my father's trust," he said, almost to himself. "He infiltrated it. For 19 years. Waiting. For what?" Amara asked quietly, though some part of her already feared the answer. "For exactly this," Elder said grimly. "Your father built something Min-jun believed should have been his from the beginning. He didn't want a seat at the table, Julian. He wanted the table itself and everyone who ever sat at it to disappear, one obstacle at a time, until there was no one left standing between him and everything your father built." His eyes were heavy with old sorrow. "Your father was the first obstacle. You, my boy, were always going to be the second." Julian's phone, Amara's phone, technically, the one Julian had been using since the message that morning, buzzed suddenly on the table between them. Another unknown number. Another message, shorter this time, colder. "Elder Boateng's house. We know. You have 1 hour to walk out on your own, or everyone inside pays for your choice." Every head in the room turned toward the window at once. In the distance, past the long gravel drive, a line of dust was rising along the road, the unmistakable signature of vehicles approaching fast, and with no intention of stopping to knock. "They tracked the call," Julian said, standing so fast his chair scraped back against the floor. Elder was right. The line wasn't clean. His eyes swept the room, Elder's stricken face, Song Hyojin already reaching for her own phone with steady, practiced urgency, Dae-ho frozen with a laptop still glowing between his shaking hands, and Amara, who had followed him into a stranger's house an hour after fleeing her own home, now staring at a cloud of dust that meant the men hunting them had just found every single person willing to help. "An hour isn't a deadline," Julian said quietly, dread settling cold and final in his chest. "It's a countdown to how long they think it'll take to make sure none of us walk out of here able to tell anyone what we just learned. If your pulse just picked up reading that comment, not done yet, and hit subscribe right now because everything is about to collide at once. This is the part of the story you don't want to look away from." The dust cloud was less than 2 minutes out. Song Hyojin was already moving, pulling Elder toward the back of the house with the calm efficiency of a woman who'd survived boardroom wars for 30 years. "There's a service road behind the orchard," she said. "My driver is 2 minutes from here. I called him the second that message came through. Julian, you and the girl go now. Elder and I will stall them." "Stall them how?" Julian demanded. "Hyojin, these are not men who negotiate." "No," she agreed, steady as stone. "But they are men who work for a company, and companies fear witnesses more than they fear guns. Elder and I are two of the last board members Min-jun cannot afford to make disappear without triggering the exact investigation he spent 19 years avoiding. You on the other hand he needs alive and broken. And her eyes flicked to Amara, sharp and not unkind. He doesn't know what to do with her yet. That makes her the most dangerous unknown in this house. Oh, both of you. Now. Dae-ho thrust the laptop into Julian's hands, his own trembling badly. Everything's on here. Copies, timestamps, the original registry. If something happens to me. Nothing is happening to you, Julian said fiercely, gripping the younger man's shoulder. Get in the car with us. There wasn't time to argue further. They ran Julian, Amara, and Dae-ho through the kitchen and out the back door into a stand of pecan trees, gravel and fallen leaves crunching underfoot, the growl of approaching engines now audible even from here. Behind them, Amara caught one last glimpse of Elder Boateng standing very straight in his own doorway, waiting to meet the men coming for his oldest friend's son with nothing but his age and his history as a shield. He's going to get hurt, Amara gasped, running full out now, Julian's hand locked around hers. He's going to buy us 4 minutes we don't have any other way to get, Julian said, voice raw. And if we don't use them, he does it for nothing. They broke from the trees into a narrow service road just as a black SUV screeched to a stop beside them, Hyojin's driver, exactly where promised. They threw themselves inside, Dae-ho shaking so hard he could barely pull the door shut, and the car lurched forward, gravel spraying, just as the first shouts echoed from the direction of Elder's house behind them. No gunfire. Not yet. That was the only mercy in it. Where does this road go? Amara demanded, twisting to look back through the rear window at a house rapidly shrinking behind trees and dust. Away, the driver said grimly. That's all that matters right now. They drove in silence for nearly 10 minutes, every one of them straining to hear sirens, gunshots, anything, hearing nothing but the wind and the frantic hammer of their own hearts. Julian's hands, Amara noticed, had gone perfectly still on the laptop in his lap, the calculating stillness she now recognized as the mask he wore when the fear underneath was too large to let show. He's not going to hurt Elder, Julian said finally, quietly, like he was trying to convince himself as much as her. Not yet. He needs this to look clean. A shooting at a retired executive's home draws exactly the kind of attention he's spent 2 days avoiding. And if you're wrong. Julian didn't answer. He didn't have to. Dae-ho spoke up instead, voice steadier now that the immediate terror had ebbed into something colder and more determined. There's a financial journalist, Grace Osebempa. She's been investigating Halcyon's board transition for 3 days. She reached out to me before I ever went to Elder. She doesn't have proof. But she has questions. And she has a platform that Min-jun can't simply make disappear the way he's tried to make everything else disappear. He looked at Julian. If we get her everything on this laptop before Min-jun realizes what we have, this stops being a secret he can bury. It becomes a story the whole world is already watching unfold. Julian looked down at the laptop, then at Amara, then finally at his own hands, the hands of a man who had spent 11 days disappearing, and now had one chance to do the opposite. To reappear, loudly, publicly, with everything Min-jun had spent 19 years trying to prevent anyone from seeing. If we do this, he said slowly, there's no more hiding after. Whatever protection anonymity gave us, it's gone the moment that story breaks. He will know exactly where to aim, and he will aim at everyone who helped me, including you. His eyes met Amara's, dark with the full weight of what he was about to ask. I need you to understand that before you say another word about staying in this with me. Amara thought of her mother's hand in hers on that last night, of every double shift she'd worked since, of a stranger on a sidewalk who'd looked, for one unguarded second, like a man worth trusting with everything she had left to give. I already told you, she said, steady despite the tremor in her chest. I'm not asking you to protect me from this. I'm asking you to let me stand in it with you. She reached over and closed her hand over his on the laptop. Call the journalist, Julian. Let's finish what your father started, and what Min-jun thought he'd buried for good. If you've made it this far and this story has you sitting on the edge of your seat, this is exactly the moment to hit subscribe, because what happens when that story breaks is not what you're expecting. We are seconds away from everything changing. Let's finish this. The story broke at 6:14 the next morning, Grace Osabempa's exclusive, time-stamped documents and all, hitting 3 continents before most of Halcyon's board had finished their coffee. The missing billionaire, Julian Osekong, alive, and what he says his father's trusted counsel did to take his company. By 7, it was the top story on every business channel Amara had ever half-watched in a break room. By 9, Halcyon's stock had dropped 11% and frozen trading twice. By noon, 2 board members Amara had never heard of were publicly calling for Min Jun Choi's immediate removal pending investigation. The same board that had crowned him CEO just 72 hours earlier now scrambling to distance themselves from a man they trusted without ever truly knowing. Min Jun didn't run. Amara would give him that much, watching the footage later with her heart in her throat. He walked into Halcyon's Seoul headquarters that afternoon like a man who still believed control was simply a matter of composure, and he was arrested in the lobby, in front of the cameras he'd spent 19 years learning to perform for, on charges that would take prosecutors months to fully untangle: fraud, conspiracy, and pending forensic review of medical procurement records from 18 months earlier. Something far graver than either. Elder Boateng was fine. Bruised, shaken, furious in the particular way of an old man who'd been underestimated one too many times in his life, but fine. He'd stood in his own doorway and told Min Jun's men, with perfect calm, that harming a board director and a witness on his own property in broad daylight was the single fastest way to guarantee the very investigation they'd been sent to prevent. They'd hesitated just long enough for Hyojin's second call to bring police to that gravel road. Sometimes, it turned out, an old man's reputation was armor enough. Julian didn't return to a penthouse or a boardroom that first week. He stayed, oddly humbly, at Amara's apartment, the one with the mismatched furniture and the photo of her mother in Lagos cloth, because, he told her quietly on the 3rd night, it was the only place in 11 days, in 11 months, in longer than he could honestly remember, that had ever felt like somewhere he was wanted rather than needed. "You could have anything now," Amara said one evening, sitting across from him at the same small kitchen table where this had all begun, the shattered mug long since swept away. "Any home, any city, any life you want back." "I know," Julian said. He reached across the table and took her hand, the same way he had that very first frightened morning, except there was nothing frightened in it now. "I spent 11 days with nothing, convinced that was the worst thing that could happen to a man like me. I was wrong. The worst thing that ever happened to me was 30 years of having everything and trusting almost no one with any of it." His thumb traced slow, absent circles over her knuckles. "You gave me shelter when I had nothing to offer you back. I'd like the chance to spend considerably longer than one storm finding out what it looks like to give something back to you." Amara felt her eyes fill, and didn't try to stop them. "My mother used to say the point was never what it cost you. It was who you became in the giving." Her voice broke just slightly on the last word. "I think I finally understand what she meant." Before we get to how this story truly ends, if it's meant something to you tonight, subscribe, share it with someone who needs a reminder that mercy is never wasted, and tell me in the comments the biggest lesson you're taking from Amara and Julian's story. I read every single one. Halcyon Dynamics elected new leadership within the month, with Julian returning not as a broken man hiding from cameras, but as his father's son, steadier, humbler, and far less willing to mistake proximity for loyalty ever again. Amara kept her job at the home health agency for exactly 4 more months, until the day Julian quietly funded a full scholarship program in her mother's name for young women from Lagos pursuing nursing degrees across 3 continents and asked Amara, not as an employer but as a partner in every sense that mattered, to help run it. People would ask her for years afterward why she'd done it, why a woman with $40 in her purse and nothing to spare had stopped on a freezing sidewalk for a stranger who could have been anyone, could have been dangerous, could have brought nothing but trouble to her door. Amara never gave the answer they expected. She never talked about billions or headlines or the life it eventually became. She simply said that some nights, the wealthiest thing a person can offer another isn't money at all, it's the willingness to see someone when the rest of the world has already decided to look away. And sometimes, if you're patient enough and brave enough to mean it, that's exactly the kind of mercy that finds its way back to you tenfold.